In the previous tutorials, we had a look at how to create this 3D room, together with the light and also this text here at the back. And what I did for this tutorial was to go ahead and duplicate the text, the Digidemi text, and then I just moved it here, and then here, and then here, and then I just changed the actual text in there. So it now says, Learn After Effects with Digidemi. And of course, because I duplicated the layer, the animations remain the same as well. So if I go back and play it, this is what the animations look like. So this is great, but if I want to export this, what I will actually get is this. If I change my view from custom to active camera, whatever you see inside the active camera view is what you'll be exporting out from After Effects. So eventually when we export, this is what we would get. Now if you want to change your angle, you can go to the cameras here and then use those tools, and you see they won't actually work. They won't do anything. I can pick any of these tools and none of them will work. That's because inside the active camera, you cannot change your view unless you have an actual camera in the scene. And to create a new camera, you go to the layer menu at the top, and then new, and then you create a camera by clicking on this button here. In After Effects, there are two cameras. One is called a 2-node camera, and the other one is called a 1-node camera. Let's start with a 1-node camera, then I'll explain the 2-node camera as well. And once I select that type, on the right hand side I can change the name of the camera, and underneath that I can change the preset. The preset basically is your focal length. So the higher the number, the longer the lens, the smaller the number, the shorter the lens. And it's generally easier to control lenses that are short. So if I choose, for example, a 200mm lens, it's going to create a camera and place it far away from the scene, and it will zoom into the scene. So a tiny change that you make on the camera's position or rotation is going to result in a greater change in the final render. This is like using a zoom lens in real life. So if you've ever used a camera, you'll know that it's more difficult to control the zoom lenses than it is to control the wide-angle lenses. To make it easier to understand first, I'm going to go ahead and pick a mid-range lens, maybe like a 28mm lens. And I'll leave the rest of the settings as they are. I'll just go and press OK. You see that the view here actually changed. That's because we changed the camera's focal length. Let me press Command Z to go back a step. And I'll go and create a new camera. And in this one, if I pick a 50mm lens, this is actually the same lens that this front view is using. So if I go and press OK, you're not going to see any difference at all here. So just keep that in mind. The default lens that's being used by After Effects is the 50mm lens. But that's a little difficult still to control. So I'm going to go for a wider angle lens. So I'm going to undo that. And then go to Layer, New, Camera. And then I'll pick a 28mm lens. If I then press OK, that's more of a wide angle lens. Now you see as soon as you do this, the camera gets created in your timeline. And although it doesn't really matter where the camera is at this stage, it's usually good practice to place the camera right at the top of the list. Because later on you'll see how you can actually switch cameras, and that's going to be important then. And now that we have the camera here, we can now, even inside the active camera, use the camera tools. So if I, for example, get the unified camera tool, I can click and drag around, and I'm actually changing what's happening to the camera. You'll see this in a lot more detail in just a second. Let's press Command Z to go back a step. Now in order to actually see the camera, let's switch to a different view. So I'm going to change my views from one view to, let's say, 2 views horizontal. And on the left hand side I have my left view, and on the right I have the active camera. So from the left view I can see how the camera is positioned. So if I press spacebar and then just drag it towards here, I can see the camera is here. Let me just get my selection tool. This is the floor, and then this is my camera, and these are my text layers. If I lift the camera up by clicking on this Y arrow, if I just lift it up, you see my active camera view, the results update. So the higher this goes, the lower the text appears to go here, and the floor. But really, this is what's happening. Now the camera is looking at the scene from this position, like that. Now to make everything much easier, we work with 4 views at the same time. So for that, I'm going to go and change my 2 views to 4 views. Now I see 4 views at the same time. Now to make a bit more space for these views, I'm going to go and turn these off. So I'm just going to go right click on any of these panels on the right, and then do Close Other Panels in Group, and then right click on the remaining one and close this one as well. And I'll get rid of the project panel as well. I'm going to make a bit more space for the entire top part as well. So I'll just drag this down. And I'll just go and press Shift // and then I'll select this view, Shift // Shift // Shift // I usually place my active camera view to the top left corner, but that's just a personal preference. So let me do that first. I'm just going to select the top left view and then change it from left to active camera. And this eventually is what we'll be exporting from After Effects. And then I'll set this one to be the top view, and then this one to be the left view, and I set one, like this one, to be the custom view. Now inside the custom view, if I use any of these camera tools, I'm still actually going to be changing where I am in space. But if I use the same tool inside the active camera, it's changing where the camera is or what the camera is doing in space. You see, as I move this in the active camera view, the camera is updating in all other views as well. If I press Command Z to undo this. But if I use the same tool in this view, the custom view, I'll be changing my position in space. This has nothing to do with the camera now. I'm only changing my position in space. And of course, in the orthographic views like the top or the left views, you can't use these tools at all. Remember, these tools only work inside the custom view, or now that we have a camera, inside the active camera view as well. So in the custom view, let me just go and zoom out a little bit by pressing C a couple of times until I get my track Z camera tool. So I can zoom out. So I can see the whole thing. And from the top view, I'll actually zoom in a little bit. And then maybe press C again until I get my track X and Y tool. So I can see it there as well. And in the left view, I'll zoom out a little more. So I can see the entire floor. And then maybe bring that down towards here. Right, so I'll be making use of all these different views to control what happens in the active camera. So let me go to my selection tool, and I'll select the camera here. In fact, to make life easier now, I can go and lock all the other layers except the camera. So let me just go and collapse these first. And then I can select them all, so from here, including the light actually, all the way down to the base, including the floor. I'll then lock them, so I can't even select them by mistake. So that's a useful thing to do when you're working in 3D. I'll just go back up. I can now click on the camera to select it. I can then, from the left view, push the camera back. And you see as I do this, the views all update at the same time. And I want the camera to point down a little bit first. So I'm going to go and rotate the camera's head down. So let me go to the camera, open this up, and you see we had the transform controls just like any other layer. And inside that, we had the rotation of the camera. So we would now be animating the X rotation of the camera. And I know this because if I look at the custom view, X is this arrow here. And I want the camera to rotate around that arrow. So I'm going to go to X rotation and maybe rotate it down a little bit, like that. And I'm going to lift the camera all the way up. So I'm just going to get my selection tool again and then lift the camera up. By the way, if you rotate an object in 3D space, let me just exaggerate this so we can see what's happening. If I rotate the object like this in 3D space, and if your arrows aren't pointing up and down, left and right, backwards and forwards, that's because you probably have this button turned on. So this is the local axis. You see now that the arrows are also rotated. But if I click on this one, the world axis mode, it ignores the rotation of the objects and it just shows us up, down, left, right, and backwards and forwards. Let me just lift this up a little bit more. Now let's say I just want the camera to fly through as the text animation takes place. Let me go back to the beginning. And I'm going to go to the camera's position and I'll keyframe it. Then I'm going to go forward to about 2.5 seconds. And then I'll just push the camera in on the left view. And then maybe bring it down so it parks just in front of this word Digidemy. So if I just bring it down, and then maybe further towards left, like that. I can now see that the motion path has been created for the camera. So if I now go and play this back, you see that the camera will be flying through as the text animation takes place. Let me set this to be easy ease. So I'll select the keyframes and then press F9. And then I'll go back, and if I play this again, you'll see what's happening there. Now that we've got this animation, we can make use of these handles here in the motion path, and then create a curve on the camera's path. So for example, if I go back or forth until the camera goes past these points, if I then go and click on these handles, I can then make the camera follow a curve rather than a straight line. If I go back and play this, you'll see now that the camera is going to follow that curve exactly. If you want to see what's happening to the camera in these views as well, the left, custom and the top views, instead of playing it, you can just click and drag on your playhead like this, and this updates all views at the same time. Whereas if you just go and play it, it only plays the active camera. Let's say eventually I want the camera to be lower down, so I'm just going to go to this keyframe here with the shift key. I'll then select the camera. I can then push this further down. You can see it's just in front of that layer there, so let me zoom in to see what's happening closely. There. So if I push the camera further down, the word width is going to appear as well actually. So that's covering the active camera now. So I'm just going to push this back up and then maybe move it towards here a little bit. And then I'll move it down. And now I actually want to rotate the camera's head as well. It's still pointing towards the floor. So what I'm going to do is to go back to the beginning, keyframe the X orientation, then I'll press K to jump to the next keyframe. I'll then set the X orientation back to be higher, like that. So it rotates up as well. I'm going to push this back a little more, like that. So the word digidemy is fully visible by the time you reach the second keyframe. So let's play this again. And of course, I can add an easy ease to these as well. So I can select these two and then press F9. So these now have the easy ease applied as well. So if I now go play it one last time. But the problem now, of course, is that we're missing the animation for the text layers here. So if I play it again, have a look how we missed these animations. So I'm going to go back and make the camera start animating a little bit later. I'll move these keyframes towards right a little bit, so that we give the animation a bit more time to start playing before the camera starts flying. If I now go and play this, you see that the first layer, learn, comes up, and then the second layer comes up. Then at this stage, the camera starts flying, and then we see the word with, and then eventually it jumps onto the word digidemy, and it stays there. If I now go and play it in real time, have a look. Now that I'm playing this back, I don't actually like how the camera stays there for a while without doing anything. So I'll just push these back. And instead of starting it late, I'll slow it down. So I'll just select these two keyframes and then separate them. So the camera is going to start animating, but much more slowly now. Maybe a little more. I'll now play this. It starts flying right away. And then it lands onto the word digidemy. I can now switch back to my one view and set this view to be the active camera. And if I now go and play it back, this is what we should have now. So you see the first word perfectly, then After Effects perfectly, then the word with, and then finally the word digidemy comes up. And by that time, the camera has gone past the other layers. And now we are landing on the word digidemy, and that's looking perfect. And of course, because the camera is landing just behind the word with, we can see the shadows of it. It doesn't actually bother me too much, so I'm going to leave this. It actually looks pretty. I'm going to leave this alone. But if it's annoying for you, what you can do is to go to the end of the layer and then chop the end, so when the camera lands there, it's no longer visible.